Coming up on Network Africa. Rival governments in Libya submits resignation after a number of protests over deteriorating living conditions and corruption. Nigeria records lowest daily figures of coronavirus cases since about 5 months. Plus, Hotel Rwanda film hero Paul RUSESABAGINA arraigned in court. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Layo Adegoke. We begin this week with stories and happenings that made headlines over the weekend.
The opposition coalition, which led mass protests in Mali ahead of last month's coup, rejected a transition charter on Sunday. A day before, the country's military leadership had agreed to establish an 18-month interim government until an election could take place. It followed 3 days of talks with opposition and civil society groups. Elsewhere in West Africa, Liberian President George Weah declared rape a national emergency and ordered new measures to tackle the problem on Saturday after a recent spike of cases in the country. The move comes after thousands of Liberians protested against rising incidents of rape in the capital Monrovia last month in a bid to draw attention to the country's alarming rate of sexual assault. Informal gold miners in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo on Sunday continued searching for more than 50 colleagues presumed dead after a mine collapsed under the weight of heavy rain on Friday. One man who survived the accident because he had just left the mine told how he passed out from shock when he realized how many were trapped below ground.
It started after heavy rain. Then I saw a child running up to say water was rising in the mine and that he didn't think there were any survivors. We went back there and found only the pit filled with water, and that's when I lost consciousness.
Accidents of this kind are not uncommon in the unregulated artisanal mines in Congo. Last year, a landslide at a gold mine killed 16 persons in October, while 43 people died in another landslide in June.
To our main stories now, the rival government in eastern Libya has submitted its resignation after several protests over deteriorating living conditions and corruption in the country. At the weekend, demonstrators in the city of Benghazi set fire to the government headquarters, also clashing with security forces in General Khalifa Haftar's stronghold of Al-Marj for the first time. The UN's Libya mission has also expressed grave concern over reports that a civilian was killed after reports that officers opened fire on protesters who forced their way into a police station, injuring 5 people. Spokesperson for General Haftar said the administration backed peaceful protests but would not allow terrorists and the Muslim Brotherhood to hijack them. However, the parliament in Tobruk needs to approve the resignation of the government. Libya has been torn by violence since longtime ruler Colonel Muammar Gaddafi was deposed in 2011 by NATO-backed forces. Well, campaigning has started in Côte d'Ivoire as opposition leader Henry Konan Bédié is pledging to welcome back exiled citizens if elected as president. The former president said he would free political and military prisoners who were jailed over the 2010 disputed election. The post-election violence after Laurent Gbagbo refused to accept that he had lost a disputed election runoff to Alassane Ouattara left about 3,000 people dead and 500,000 others displaced. Mr. Gbagbo is in exile in Belgium and plans to run in October's elections, despite being barred over a previous conviction. Mr. Bédié unveiled his candidature for the former ruling party, the Democratic Party of Côte d'Ivoire African Democratic Rally, in an event attended by thousands of supporters. His party had threatened to boycott October's general elections if conditions to make them fair and transparent were not met. Meanwhile, the Constitutional Council is set to announce the final list of candidates for the polls by Wednesday. Medics in Libya are struggling to contain the number of COVID-19 cases they have. As the pandemic started to rage through the country last month, medics working in the war-ravaged country's few functioning hospitals faced their nightmare scenario, a surge in cases and dwindling resources.
Aisha Milad Belhasne, a nurse at a quarantine center in the coastal city of Misrata, caught the disease while trying to cope with the onslaught of new cases.
Suddenly, the air starts to decrease bit by bit until you reach the point where you feel like you're losing your life.
Her colleague, Hamza Abdurrahman Jelwal, a supervising nurse at the center, has not seen his family since Libya's lockdown began in March. He has also not been paid. Jelwal also tested positive for the coronavirus in August and was quarantined in the same facility. As soon as he got better, he got up and went back to work. Their experience underscores the high stakes and growing challenges for Libyan medics as the number of confirmed cases spikes.
There are limited resources in the Misrata Quarantine Center. It will not allow for a large number of cases. God forbids if this virus spreads more than it already has.
Figures have climbed rapidly from a few hundred last month to almost 20,000 now. The quarantine center where Jawal works in the Garara district had been a private clinic but was taken over for the crisis by the state-operated Misrata Medical Center. Administrative issues closed it for most of a month early this summer, he said, contributing to the accelerating number of cases as people could not come in to quarantine. That was when staff started to quit because they had not been paid.
We started in March, but closed for several reasons, be it poor organization or otherwise, for a month. And when we reopened, we have since not received any salaries from the state.
There are few ventilators and little other equipment. State funding, regularly hit by shortfalls and delays, has been particularly disrupted this year because of a blockade on oil export by the LNA and its allies.
For the first time in almost 5 months, Nigeria recorded the lowest daily infection of COVID-19 at 79 cases. The new infections were recorded in 12 states and the Federal Capital Territory, FCT. Now, before Sunday's record, the last time the country recorded less than 100 new positive samples was on April 27th, when 64 cases were confirmed. At the time, Nigeria had 1,337 cases, out of which 251 patients had recovered and 40 persons had died. But since April, the daily cases of COVID-19 had increased. And as it stands, the country has 56,256 cases with 1,082 deaths. However, 44,152 people have recovered. In Africa, where the total cases of the coronavirus is 1,353,283, over 1 million people have recovered, and the death toll stands at 32,625. All schools and universities in South Sudan have reopened after nearly 6 months of closure due to the coronavirus pandemic. The decision to reopen schools and universities was reached during a cabinet meeting on Friday chaired by President Salva Kiir. Health Minister Elizabeth Akuyol told her colleagues that there was a significant reduction in the number of infections that necessitated the reopening of learning institutions in the country. The government closed all schools in March after coronavirus cases surged. Now, the Health Ministry says this is a welcome development, but is going to involve huge logistics to prepare schools. Therefore, fumigation should be conducted prior to resumption of classes. The United Nations Children Agency UNICEF and cultural agency UNESCO had earlier urged the reopening of schools in African countries. Well, the South African Unification Task Team and undertakers affiliated to the National Funeral Practitioners Association of South Africa are embarking on a 3-day national strike. The strike, which will affect the movement of bodies between homes, hospitals and mortuaries nationwide, has been organized by the Unification Task Team, which comprises 17 associations and forums. Gauteng will be the hotspot for the shutdown, as there will be no removals from government hospitals and mortuaries and home removal with effect from Monday until Wednesday. Even though the Funeral Federation of South Africa has taken the decision not to support the national shutdown, UTT says most of their FFSA members are under UTT. The South African Department of Health says it is concerned by the protest, as this action may lead to undesired conditions and risks to public health.
The pending one is the issue of certificate of competence, which sits with the Department of Health, the Rwanda Department of Health. The COC basically is the one that defines the funeral undertaker. It defines the funeral undertaker as someone who owns a mortuary. And we are having a problem, number one, with that definition in terms of ownership. That how can government derive a regulation that has an economic kind of a way for it to be a regulation? Because if you say own, it means you're advantaging people who are well off, you're disadvantaging people who don't have anything. And those people who don't have anything are majority small and emerging funeral undertakers, who are predominantly black people of this country. So we are saying to them, let's sit down and discuss this definition in the first place, so that we can be able to level the ground for everybody to be able to trade in this industry. Secondly, we are saying the certificate of competence is it speaks to the facility, the mortuary. Basically, government will tell you and show you how you can build your mortuary, what needs to be done in terms of the regulation. And then when they are happy, they give you a COC, a certificate of competence, for you to keep the bodies and train. So now we are saying there are very few people, few undertakers that have a COC. Majority of undertakers who are small and emerging don't have a COC because they don't own mortuary facilities.
The current state of the COC is clear, and we are not fighting the issuance of COCs. But what we are simply saying is we have got funeral undertakers who don't have their own buildings to put their storage facilities, and hence such services are being outsourced. And then the authorities are failing to recognize that particular aspect. But what surprises us is that the government itself is outsourcing such facilities. But when it comes to us funeral undertakers, it's forbidden. So we are asking the government to reconsider that particular aspect, and most probably go a step further to allocate us land so that we can have clustered storage facilities whereby we can set up a building that will accommodate all the funeral parlors in that particular area.
Police in Somalia are investigating the rape and murder of a 19-year-old girl at a hotel in the capital, Mogadishu. 4 people have so far been detained in connection with the death of Hamdi Mohammed that happened in the neighborhood of Waberi. Local media reports that she was raped before she was thrown off a 6-story building. Ms. Mohammed's family has been demanding for full investigation of the case. There has been outrage in the city, with women protesting, supporting the family's demand that police conduct a proper investigation and ensure that those responsible are jailed. Still ahead on Network Africa. A tragedy in Tanzania as 10 pupils burnt beyond recognition in a school fire. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the program. RUSESABAGINA, the man who inspired a Hollywood film about the 1994 Rwandan genocide, has been arraigned in court. That's 2 weeks after he was paraded to media in the capital, Kigali, following his controversial arrest. Mr. RUSESABAGINA is accused of terror charges related to attacks by the rebel group National Liberation Front in southwestern Rwanda in 2018 and 2019. FLN is a military wing of MRCD Umbubwe, a Rwandan foreign-based platform of opposition parties. However, Mr. RUSESABAGINA is its vice president. Now, reports say security was tight at the court building on Monday, with only selected journalists covering the proceedings. Mr. RUSESABAGINA's family assembled a group of international lawyers to represent him, along with a lawyer based in Rwanda, but reports say they've not been allowed to represent him in the country. Mr. RUSESABAGINA's family also say he was abducted from Dubai, accusing the government, but the government says he came to Rwanda and was arrested. Well, let's get more on this story from Rwandan lawyer and analyst GATETE. Thierry, thank you so much for speaking to us. Let me begin with your opinion on today's court's proceedings.
Yes, well, they are discussing, thank you for having me on the show. They are discussing detention. So the lawyer is arguing that
All right, Mr. NYIRINGABO, Mr. RUSESABAGINA arrest is a controversial one. His family is accusing the government of kidnap, but they have denied this, and he is a prominent man. What would you say is, behind his arrest? Some think it's politically motivated. Seems like we're having some issues with the audio. Try to reconnect. But in the meantime, sad news coming from Tanzania. At least 10 pupils have died after fire engulfed their school dormitory in northwestern Kagera region. 7 other pupils who sustained serious injuries have also been hospitalized. The dormitory was housing boys aged 6 to 10 years. Now, police say they've begun investigations and the cause of the fire is yet to be established. The fire started at one of the dormitories in Biamungu English Medium Primary School in Kierwa District at around 4:30 a.m. local time. Kierwa District Commissioner Rashid Miamu said that the bodies were burnt beyond recognition. Well, South Africans are still speaking out about their anger over a racist advertisement for Tresemme hair care products that brought back dark memories. In a country that remains starkly unequal more than 2 decades after the end of white minority rule, many are still upset about the incident.
Sitting in a hair salon as a stylist braids her natural hair, Sana Sebon recalls a time in 2013 when she worked on a construction site and was told her dreadlocks were too long and represented a hazard. She was upset, she said, mainly because her white colleagues with long hair were not told the same as their hair was considered normal. 7 years on, that term is still haunting her again after an advert was released by Tresem, a Unilever brand, describing images of African black hair as frizzy and dull and dry and damaged, while a white woman's hair was referred to as normal.
It really upset me. I took it as an insult because we are in the year 2020. How ignorant can you be to still think black women's natural hair is ugly, is fuzzy, and it's all those negative words?
Sabon says she turned to dreadlocks after being tired of straightening her natural hair to make it look presentable in others' eyes. Unilever has apologized for the advert, which it admitted was racist, while Tresem South Africa and Drug Saw Clicks Group, on whose website the advert was posted, have also apologized. In those years, a pencil test was used to determine someone's racial identity. A pencil was inserted into a person's hair, and if it did not fall out, that person was considered not white.
Our forefathers have fought this. Are we still fighting this? When will it end? Maybe the government is not doing enough to punish them. I don't know.
Black hair is still policed in places like schools, where black girls with natural afros or dreadlocks are sometimes suspended for not wearing their hair right or are asked to straighten their hair.
Everything about being a black female in South Africa or even in the world screams, you're not good enough, you don't fit in here, you're not wanted here.
Kathleen herself remembers being told in high school that her dreadlocks did not align with the school's neatness policy. Unilever has pulled all Tresem products from South African retail stores for 10 days. Its South African unit has moved to set up an advisory board and also a diversity committee.
Renowned South African sculptor PITIKA NTULI has had to adapt to a new way of exhibiting his art due to the coronavirus pandemic. His latest project, Azibuyele Emasizweni, meaning Return to the Source, was recently named the highest artistic achievement in the history of solo exhibitions in the country. He talks about the state of African art in the time of the new coronavirus.
Renowned South African sculptor PITIKA NTULI is hailed for his provocative art pieces through the years. His newest exhibition features 45 sculptures made from animal bones. NTULI says that the show, titled Azibuyele Emasizweni, loosely translates to Return to the Source in local Zulu language, is a way for NTULI to use African spirituality to connect with the origins of human life.
And then when you come in here,
the 78-year-old artist spent 3 years creating the sculptures. But he says that for him, his artworks are an apt response to the global health crisis and socio-political chaos in the country.
we have to prepare ourselves for more kind of pandemics, simply because we have disrespected nature. We have drowned nature with plastic, oil slips, and everything, and not caring.
NTULI says his sculptures are also meant to encourage the society to resolve the issue of greed and corruption.
So the whole issues of greed, the issues of corruption, are the ones that have really led us to where we are now. And yet, as an African people, our proverbs and everything else tells us about how we must be ecologically balanced.
The exhibition was originally meant for a museum, but for now, it will be presented virtually before a museum tour scheduled for 2021.
And that's the program for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Adegoke.